around stuff. Let's get Yancy on today. Yancy!
Yo, how are you?
Make her the same size as me. I should say make her bigger than me.
Oh my goodness. Good morning to you.
Good morning. It wasn't that long ago that I saw you, and then I was seeing you again.
I know. We just keep being in the same room.
I love that. Can that happen more and more in
Virtual
2025?
and literal both.
Yes. 2025, 2026, if the Lord tarries, 2027. We just, that's a lot of fun. And so for those of you who are joining us today, I'm referring to the fact that Yancy and I got a chance to do some studio work yesterday because she's working on a new single. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about that, but we got a lot of stuff to cover at some point.
Definitely this spring have a version of That's My King on its way, the great song that CeCe Winans has recorded and taken to the top. And so kind of putting my own spin on it and getting that ready for a bunch of kids and families and churches to be able to use in their children's ministries, and pumped to make this version available in April is the plan. So
okay.
Tuned.
I feel like that's kind of like building a house, right? You set the foundation up and you have, all the people who are involved in it, and you're hoping that it'll get done. And then there's often so many factors that are out of your control that you have to just wait on the Lord and wait for the Lord to arrange the thing. How is that as an artist? I know that there's some artists who are watching this today, but that whole process of having to work through several different distributors and people who are editors before something can come out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You gotta just have some patience and have some real deadlines and have some fake deadlines along the way, and hope that the two things work together.
So what I'm hearing you say is be flexible, but be inflexible. Yes.
Kind of, sort of. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I was introduced to some of your friends last night. I'm assuming those were all your friends. I'd not worked with some of them before. And it's just great because I get a chance to get a little peek into your world and the different people that you work with and how all of that comes together and projects that we're able to do. And that was just a fantastic experience. Shout out to all the folks who were there last night, singing some group vocals last night. Just some tremendous people. And I wanted to say that because, there's any number of expose pieces that are out there about how bad things in the music industry are. And certainly you can find darkness if you want to find darkness, but there's also a lot of light. And those were some wonderful people that I got a chance to work with last night. So kudos to all of your team. And thanks for including me in that.
Of course. Thanks for always saying yes when we call and text you.
Well, it's funny because I got a text message. This is like being called to the principal's office. I'm signed to an acting and modeling agency here in town, and my agent.
I didn't know this about you.
Oh, you didn't know that? Oh yeah. No. Well, I'll just give a quick shout out. Advantage Talent, Misty Griggs, fantastic
agent. Is that how
agent.
you got your job in Toby Mac's video?
That is indeed how I got the job in Toby Mac's video. It had nothing to do with music whatsoever, but my agent knew that I was involved somewhere in the Christian music industry, and she's like, "Hey, this guy Toby Mac, I don't know, you might know who he is, has this video. Do you want to go to it?" And I'm like, yes. And so that was that. But she texted me yesterday, and she's like, "I've not seen any auditions from you come in lately." And I told her, I'm looking at the things that are coming in, and because I'm traveling for half the month, like I can either audition and not actually shoot the videos, or I'm just missed the whole thing entirely. And so she's like, okay, well, all right. So I've not actually done anything. I've not actually recorded anything professionally for the last year because I'm traveling so much. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you asked at a time when I actually was able to come, and I think that it just happened to fall in place the last several times for us to be able to work together. So that's a blessing in and of itself that I'm able to work with you, and the schedule just happens providentially that I was in town.
Yes, that is always a delight and a relief when it happens. I know you can identify with this, Erskine, but one of the great mysteries of life to me is how, like, even, an opportunity to go play somewhere, it's like you have all these weeks of the year that are available, but multiple people ask you to do like the exact same day or the exact same weekend. And it's always like so soul crushing when you're like, I want to do that and I can do it any other time, but I can't do that day, And
Exactly. I think you and I had that conversation. I think I remember I was in Oklahoma City, and we were. Whenever I call you, if I'm in a particular city, you've been there before, and so I think I was asking some recommendations for places to eat and hangout spots and different things. And I remember us having that conversation the first time, and I thought Yancy really gets this. Is that you you long to be available, and you hope that the calendar can just play out to where one person calls you and it's like, yes, I can do that on a Monday, yes, I can do that on a Tuesday, and like the whole calendar is filled out. But to your point, Yancy, so many times it's been like, hey, Thursday at 2 o'clock, we need you to do this, and it's like 6 calls Thursday at 2 o'clock. What are you doing Thursday at 2 o'clock? Somebody calls and you're like, oh my goodness, they're going to ask me about Thursday at 2 o'clock, and it's like I can only do one of those things, and so the other 4 or 5 things, they're all gone.
yeah.
So
How people will talk about like their question they're going to ask God when they get to heaven, which in and of itself is a ridiculous concept, because you're like, you could ask him about it now and he could answer. But for that figure of speech, I always joke that would be my question for God, is like, why did it work out that way, that there were all these gigs you couldn't do because they were at the same time as another one?
Yeah. Well, providence, I guess, would be the theological term for that. But as I think about that, that helps me tremendously when I'm talking with other artists and when I'm sharing different things about, why did you book what you booked, and why did you go where you went? And I'm thinking, because that was the only open door. That was the only thing that fit in that slot, in that time, in that place. And so it was pretty easy to figure out the direction and movement of God, because no, can't do it, can do it. Okay, there we go.
That's fair.
And so that has helped tremendously over the years. I got in the corner of the screen, the icon never gives up. Probably should say a word about that. We worked collaboratively together on that. And that has been fantastic. Every once in a while, as I'm singing through that song, I'll hear little background vocals there. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's my girl. There's my girl.
So fun. So fun. Yes. I remember that day well, writing the song and getting to come back and work on it with you. And I think along the way you sent me like a little video of you like testing it out somewhere on the road as well.
Oh, yeah, that's what happens. That's what happens. We write these songs, and I don't feel like I have mastery of the song or command of the song until I play it live in front of an audience. And then kind of sit back and engage with the audience's responses. And I was on tour with Josh Schneider a few weeks ago in January, and we played that song. And one of the stops that we were at in Savannah, Georgia, a lady comes up and she's like, the entire night, that was my favorite song. And we kind of teamed up on it together. And so they were helping out with part of the song, and we were just having a good time on stage. And a lady came up and she's like, that was my favorite song of the entire evening. And I'm like, oh, we're trending in the right direction.
Cool. I like that.
And so really appreciate that. Well, we got you on today, and I don't want to waste your time because I want to jump into the Stained Glass Kids and what's going on with that. And so without further ado, well, breaking news, Yancy is on the show today, and we're going to talk in just a few moments about Stained Glass Kids, her newest project podcast that's out. I listened to some of it last night, and you guys are going to enjoy the concepts behind this, and I think it's really going to reach and show you guys another side of Yancy. Coming back in just a few moments. All right. Let's get up here. All right. So I listened to the latest podcast last night. Some of it got kind of late. And so I was, I got the idea behind what was going on there. And it was not what I thought it was until I started listening to it and thinking, oh, Yancy, this is Yancy 2.0. Yancy has gone to another level as far as this is concerned. And so as I know I don't want to insult anybody out there, but it says a podcast where through raw, redeemed, and broken, honest interviews, we bring light to the darkest parts of our stories as PKs and ministry kids. Talk to us a little bit about what's going on with Stained Glass Kids.
Yeah. So, goodness gracious, this has been a long time coming. Obviously, I'm a PK. I've only ever grown up with a dad that worked in churches and worked in ministry. And if you don't know what a PK is, it stands for a pastor's kid.
Preacher kid.
Yeah. And if I'm honest, like for probably the last, like, I bet especially the last 4 years or so, I knew that I was just burdened for this group of people. And in many ways was kind of like, I don't know what to do with this, God, besides obviously like pray for them and, maybe look for some opportunities to like speak into it. But in many ways, I wasn't even sure like what I wanted to say. I just knew that, oftentimes there's stereotypes and there's a lot of people that think a bunch of PKs are just trouble. And, certainly we've heard stories and testimonies of people that have even walked away from church and left the church because they had a bad heart experience of something that went on with either, specifically their parent or related to their parent's job in that. And so it just was one of those things where it's kind of like my spiritual antenna was up, kind of, I don't know, roaming and seeking to just pay attention to this group. And
yeah,
I was on a panel at a conference beginning of last year, kind of on the subject and related to ministry families. And I remember walking back towards where my booth was during that conference and just thought there should be a podcast where we talk about some subjects that don't normally get talked about related to church, staff, life, the culture of that. Just oftentimes I found, it's a one-on-one conversation you might have with a peer. It's a little conversation in a back hallway, at a church or a conference center or something. But it's not like I've just, over the years, it's not like I've seen those blog posts or, that book or that article or whatnot that was really speaking into this subject. And so God, as he does, just ordains our steps. And I had a meeting at one point last year and kind of brought up this idea that I had. And if I'm honest, immediately and as soon as I said it out loud, it was one of those moments where I thought, can I take that back?
Can I unsay what I just said? Can you unhear? Here, look at this pen.
Distract myself from this topic again. But, kind of went away to pray about it and process it. And I remember like being on the phone with one friend and I was just like bawling. I was crying my eyes out. And I was like, I think if I'm this emotional about it, like it's obvious that I'm supposed to do this because
poke.
Yeah. And so, like it's not, let me preface and say, I love Jesus and I love his church.
Okay.
And so this is not me. This is not some expose, as there are podcasts out there that are very much clickbait, shock value, just trying to lay all the mud out there for everybody to see. Like that's not the heart and the intention. It's more so that, hey, there are some functions, there are some ways people are treated, there are some expectations that are put on people that are not healthy. And so let's talk about it. Let's talk about how that has maybe affected some people, through the tried and true wisdom. Let's hear how they've learned to process that and grow from it. And, let's take all that information, let's learn from it, let's modify. And so the kind of one way I liken it to is it's just like a historical property. Like the church is certainly a historical property. It is a treasure that we should treasure, and I do. But even when you're doing like a remodeling of a historical property, there's some TLC involved in that. And so that's kind of,
Yeah.
I don't
And
know,
so
kind
I
of the
wanted to,
podcast is
yeah, I wanted to,
gently, tenderly handling some of these subjects and
yeah,
just
that
trying,
was my observation, Yancy, not to cut you off, but I'm cutting you off because it's kind of my
yeah.
show. But hopefully this will be a good cutting you off.
Yeah.
Just to make an observation about this, it's interesting when you're looking at the timing of God related to some of these sensitive matters. You know, you've been in the industry for 25, 27 years, and you've been doing a lot of different projects, and people know your heart and they know your vision. They know your commitment to children and watching people grow up in the faith and be solidified in their faith at a young age and then continue on in a healthy manner. This is, when I say Yancy 2.0, I look at this as a very sensitive subject matter because there's, like you were talking about, there's the ditch on both sides there where it just becomes, you know, our lives, the way that we were raised in the faith was just terrible and our parents did a terrible job. No, they did the best they possibly could. And I think when I had Josh Snyder on, he was talking about the first time he got grounded for playing Toby Mac. His parents just didn't understand that music and what it was supposed to represent. And then his parents have grown over the years, and you know, he doesn't look down on his parents because they did that, but they were doing the best they could at the time. So there's that side of it in which, you know, the parents were too strict, or the kids were just too wild, and there's culture of expectation. You really have to be, and this is my compliment to you, Yancy, you really have to be a mature believer to be able to process, on one hand, the hurt that's there, sometimes the misconceptions that are there, and to balance that in a way. As I was listening to it last night, I was thinking, this is kind of the middle of the road here. She's not, like you're talking about, it's not an expose where everything was terrible, but it's not, you know, rose-colored glasses where everything was good. This is her walking down the road and saying, let's hear the stories and let's process and let's heal and let's continue to move forward in faith. And so I just wanted to commend you and just say thank you so much for your maturity and dealing with the sensitive subject matter.
Well, thank you very much. I think, you know, I think when all is said and done, this will be one of my life's greatest honors, is having these conversations. I think it's really twofold. I think on one hand, I want a bunch of PKs and ministry kids out there to just be able to see themselves in some other people's stories and realize like they're not alone. It's not just them. You know, I think many times they can see themselves in someone else's story. And then at the same time, often I think they'll realize, okay, something they experienced, there's other people out there that have experienced something 10 times worse. And so like they actually could like have a little bit about their own story.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that, I really want pastors, executive pastors, any ministry leaders that are out there running departments in a church, I want them listening to this because I feel like there's so much that can be learned so they can make some, you know, minor changes in how they lead their staff or expectations they have for their team, or just even little things about how often discipleship maybe gets overlooked in some of those pastors' kids because they just kind of think like, oh, okay, well, your family's on payroll, or your dad is this person, you're fine, you're not struggling with this. And I'm, you know, one of the things I'm hearing is like, many times they're kind of skipped over rather than leaning into that and really investing in those kids as well as anybody else in the youth group, you know?
This is interesting, Yancy, because I'm glad that you said that. I was having a conversation with a student from Belmont the other day. We went out, grabbed coffee, and, you know, just checking in with the young students, and, you know, very promising music careers in front of them. And they were talking about, you know, the size of church and the type of church they want to go to, place where they could use their skills. And I started referring to that, and they made a comment about discipleship. And I said, correct me if I'm wrong. This may have changed because I'm not necessarily in your same age demographic or in the school mentality, but people who are at, you know, certain size church, when they're in production, they're pretty much not a part of the church, as I understand. You don't go to the same discipleship meetings. You're not in the same Bible studies. In fact, when this student was helping me out to do something, they were running the production and they were adjusting, you know, various things before my performance, but they were not a part of the Bible study and the different things that we were doing backstage, prayer and all those different things. And I was like, there's a subculture that exists within a subculture, and it can be preachers' kids, it can be musicians, oftentimes are overlooked. Artists sometimes are overlooked because you come into the church and then your expectations are different than everybody else who comes to the church. And so I think that that's good of you, Yancy, to have an eye out to say, wait a minute, there's some gaps in this thing. There's some people who are getting overlooked. And if we're going to talk about discipleship, we want to make sure that that is in a healthy manner, flourishing among all of God's people.
Yeah, it's just like anything. Oftentimes, with the best of intentions, you still end up with some blinders on your eyes. And so, I think these conversations are just really, bringing to light some issues that maybe you just haven't paused to process before and think through. And as soon as you hear somebody say it out loud, you can put it through your own context and your own situation and kind of realize like, oh yeah, these are little things I can do. This is me just intentionally having an extra conversation with that staff kid or whatnot. And so, one of the things, I just kind of have felt as the podcast even began a few months back, is just that in many ways, God is saying enough is enough, and like just the dead bodies on the side of the road, or, just the baggage of the things that we have heard about through the rumor mill over the years. I really think, it's an issue that matters to the heart of God, because we would be saying it's not okay that kingdom work has this many casualties. And so I really hope that it will be something that brings a lot of healing to move the church forward in healthier ways.
I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and they were saying that, I don't know if it was a seminary, but people that they had grown up with in church that had professed at one time faith in Christ, and they'd gone on mission trips together. They'd done a lot of ministry things together. They can look back over the course of their lives, and I think it was like almost like 10 or 20 people that they grew up with. They were like, that person does not go to church anymore. That person doesn't want to have anything to do with the faith anymore. That person is not engaged whatsoever. And it's just like, okay, I mean, there's obviously God is sovereign. The gospel is the gospel. But what is happening in the sense of like people just jettisoning it and saying, wait a minute, this is not what I expected, or I'm not, I'm not doing this anymore. And like you said, the ministry bodies that are strewn over the centuries and the decades, every once in a while you hear, wonderful story of somebody that, flourishes, and they begin to, process things a little bit later on when you thought, man, that I'm not sure that they're understanding anything that's going on there. And then they go on, they become a pastor, and they, they're on the mission field. But you hear a lot of stories of people who just, they just walked away, or maybe not even walked away. They're sometimes on the internet saying the most vile things about God's people and the church. And that definitely, I know, hurts the heart of God.
Yeah. One of the things, I learned walking through one of those hard seasons of a situation that had happened for me and for my family. I remember, just coming and to the realization that God is always good, even when his people aren't. Never confuse the two. And, even as I had some friends of mine that I'd grown up with, we'd gone to the same church, we'd heard a lot of the same sermons, and some other junk had happened in their life. And they were both people that had kind of chosen to walk away. And in that season, I remember both of them, like after having an evening where we had dinner and hung out, both of them messaging me and commenting afterwards, like, I'm so impressed that you've been able to not let this affect your faith, and not shake your faith. And I was like, that's my only option. Like, this was a messed up situation that was so broken. I knew I couldn't fix it on my own, So like, and the way my brain worked, I'm like, why in the world would I run out there and try to go to the world where it would just be me left trying to build the pieces back from the rubble?
That's good.
Instead,
you, Lord, have the bread of life.
trusting God was my only option because I knew he could fix it, And so, like, let me just let him fix it. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt any less, as you're walking through it. But
Uh-huh.
I think that's where a lot of people get messed up is, they confuse what some humans that, yes, are made in the image of God have done to them. Those words, those actions, they confuse that with the character of God. And you have to separate it. You have to realize these are human beings that have human nature that are still struggling to bear the fruit of the Spirit. And sometimes they strike out, and that's not what they bear. But you can't blame their behavior on God. You've got to separate it and trust him for his good character and never confuse the two.
Yeah, I want to just say that, as someone who aspires maybe a greater capacity in pastoral ministry, we're doing church planning. We've been church planning here in East Nashville for the last 4 years. A very sensitive subject matter. But when people don't realize this, that people's lives are complex. There's a lot of things that go on in people's lives, and you just take something that's as simple as in marriage, people who are having difficulty. Like, that's a tinderbox of counseling and helping people navigate through some of those things. And so, say for instance, somebody gets a divorce. How does the church respond to that? How do you counsel through that? I mean, it is just devastating. What if there's infidelity and types of things like that in which it is required upon you to bring church discipline in people's lives? Like, those are some of the thorniest issues, and it's not theoretical issues. That is going to happen. There are going to be marital struggles and challenges because Satan hates those kind of things. But speaking into those things, I've seen good churches, good pastors who have counseled biblically. They've told people exactly what God's word says, but because of the intensity and just the bomb that has taken place in their lives, they feel hurt by the church. They revile against the church. And it's like, yeah, I know that there's some things that the church doesn't get right in some areas that they don't necessarily always handle the correct way, but sometimes they do. But life is just messy like that. And sometimes people don't respond the way that, okay, we've been rebuked and the word of God says this and it clearly says this. And so therefore we're going to conform our lives to the word of God. It just doesn't work that way. And so on both sides of the street, there's church hurt that is things that could have been avoided, should have been avoided to some extent. And then there's things that this is just what the church does. Like, church discipline is a thing, like recognizing a certain amount of accountability in your family, and being brought to bear on those things. That's a thing. Like, that has to happen. So yeah, it's just a lot. If I could ask this, and you can take this wherever you want to, Yancy, has there been in your life a time, a season, a circumstance that you think of that maybe people who are listening to this today could say, man, I'm glad that she shined the light on that through the lens of her life, because I've been thinking that same thing.
Like, what do you mean? Like,
I wanted to make that general, but I mean, is there a specific?
I know it's so general. Be more specific.
What comes to mind, I guess, when you think about an area that most people don't think about? There's an area in ministry that can get overlooked, and you think about in my own life, this is what happened to me. This is my story. And I would just share this today because there's somebody who might be in the same boat. You might need to hear these words. I'll let you take that and run with it. So I left it broad, but then you can specify where you want to go.
I think a couple things come to mind. I think, one of the things that I've processed is, just about every guest has made the comment about the glass house or the fish bowl or the microscope, like it's all the same thing, no matter how they word it.
Sure.
And so that is a thing. And I believe it's important to remember that these are people that have spouses have children. And many times you can have an opinion of someone and you can start verbalizing that opinion and throwing some things around out there in your church community. And it's important to remember that these are people that have a family. And do you want such things to be said about you to your children or overheard? Do you want such things to be said about your spouse? I think it's kind of like sometimes I think church people like just don't even have a filter. They think they can be as critical as they want to be of that pastor or that person in leadership, and not saying you can't ever question anything. I just think we almost lose some manners and some dignity. I've thought about it like this, like, I think there's probably very few jobs out there where you have the job and your family is brought into the public mix of it. Sure, we know politicians would fall into that category. I think probably in local communities, the closest thing would maybe be like some school principals or some, school superintendents or something like that, where a lot of people in the neighborhood could have an opinion about that person and their job and that kind of over, but I've thought about it on the flip side. I'm like, my insurance agent, that has our car insurance, like, I've been to his office. I'm sure I've seen a picture of his family, when I was there, but I don't really know anything about his family. Like, and nor is anything that's going on in his personal life affecting my opinion of our business relationship, of him helping me insure my cars, and I think that's just one of those things that normal people don't really process the differences in that relationship. And so,
yeah, it's not nearly as transactional,
caught up in the middle of it.
Yeah, as it is relational in that regard. And having community. I was talking with and I think it may have been one of my ministry partners. I think it was. I'm not going to say their name because we talk a lot about various things that go on.
Yeah.
And he was talking about sort of on the other side of this, doing triage for missionaries, because there's a lot of missionaries that in a lot of ways will just get overlooked, or a missionary spouse will pass away. I had this situation happen directly in my own family. A missionary spouse will pass away, and then it's kind of like, well, you're not doing missions anymore. Well, you've relocated, your family is in a particular place. Like, figure out the onboarding and off-ramp process of that. But it's like, okay, you don't raise support anymore. Okay, your support is dropped. And like stories like that, where it's just like, people feel like it's their responsibility to keep people in ministry humble.
Yeah.
And so you sometimes will look at the salary and you're like, okay, should they now go get an extra job or 2 or 3 so that they can do the things that you've called them to do in terms of ministry? And I've heard some just terrible, terrible stories of pastors' wives not having just even basic things because their budget is just so lean, and there's just so many things that they have to do without because, they have to serve the church after all. And so there's just a lot that's out there. We could take this conversation offline, and I'm sure have a lot of maybe similar things, because as a parent, I'm always mindful of the fact that even though it's not necessarily pastoral ministry, it's more of an itinerant ministry. Like, all of that comes with a cost. Like, there are certain things that I have missed that I've wanted to be around for. And I will say, there are very many times when I can think of churches, did a revival in Dakar, Senegal, rallying around my wife or my family, whoever's around, and then praying for us and really investing in the entire family. I will say there have been numerous examples of that as well. And I'm always very much appreciative of the fact that when I go into a conference somewhere, sometimes people will buy flowers for my wife who may not be at the conference, just to say that we know that without her sacrifice and the things that she's doing, you would not be able to do what it is that you're doing. And so I'm mindful of those things, and those things do matter.
For sure. Absolutely.
And so, man, I'm so excited about this resource and being able to hear more episodes of this. You
Yes,
you
please do.
expanded it because I guess somebody said, it's not just the preacher's kids, but it's also the missionaries that are out there and other people who are experiencing these types of things in ministry. So I'm glad to hear that you expanded it, um, and are
Yeah,
taking
I
it
think,
into
in
consideration.
general, it's to me, it's ministry kids. I mean, there's people that might be like, for instance, my dad has never been a senior pastor, but I've always considered myself a PK. So you've got those people that would be
Sure.
like, oh, a PK is only a senior pastor. But I'm sorry, when you work in mega churches that have a high level of leadership, there's a bunch of people that wear those high level hats, and my dad
Yes.
has had those and whatnot. And so, I mean, it's it still is the same thing. So, whether it was a worship pastor role or a children's pastor or student ministry, like if you're running an area of ministry in a church, um, you totally fall under this PK umbrella. But yeah, PK's ministry kids. I did have multiple people request missionary kids, and so
Oh, yes.
this week's episode is my first missionary kid story. And so certainly those things count because it's all interchangeable. And I had one friend, actually, just because she had always been like a departmental ministry director type role, she was like, she didn't think of herself as having PKs, but her children identified as a PK. And
Sure.
when she actually went through a job change at one point, she said her kids were really struggling because their identity felt rocked because of her job change. And she was like, I didn't even know they thought of themselves, in
Mhm.
that way until, just the title had been changed. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
But
And
there's
so,
there's amazing things to learn. I've even had some people listening. They're like, normal people in a church should just listen to this, just because if you if you really want to learn and care, I think all of us can adjust our behavior to operate in a more fruit of the spirit bearing way. So no
mhm,
matter I kind of say, no matter what side of the table you're sitting on at the conversation, like there's something you can walk away and learn.
absolutely. Absolutely. So exciting. What an awesome interview. And we have more projects hopefully that we'll be able to do in the future, but this is an
Yeah.
important project I think that you are working on, and I wanted to highlight that. Check out Yancy's ministries. She's got a ton of different things, books out there, resources that are out there. As we said before, she's working on a new children's song that's going to be out hopefully in April,
Yeah.
prayerfully in April. Two-time Dove Award winning. What's up? Just really quickly before you jump off of here, I know that braggadocious it would not be the case. As much hard work as you put in there, I'm glad that people are starting to finally recognize just the incredible work that you put in over the years and acknowledge that.
Mhm.
Talk to me about winning a second Dove Award
Oh my gosh. I
en
mean,
route to a third.
whew, I don't even know what to say other than it's just God's kindness. I think I think one of the things that makes me happy about this second win is, I do make two different kinds of music. And so uh, I make some music for younger kids called Little Praise Party. And
Hmm.
those are the cartoon version of me. And when I won my first dove, it was for one of those projects, which is a whole special project in and of itself. But this more recent dove that I won in October, it was for the bigger kid music I make that I'm gearing towards preteens. It sounds really normal. I would say it sounds about 95% not like kids' music,
Uh-huh.
easily. But I'm kind of targeting that towards some older kids. And so that's one this time. And so what makes me, I think, happiest about it is just now both kinds of music that I make for kids have won a dove. And so it feels very well rounded and balanced. And so I'm grateful.
Well, I'm gonna praise the Lord for that, and
Yeah.
I have seen the elevation of Yancy over the years, 1.0, 2.0, and I'm super excited about that. I'm going to pull a little Robert Redford on you here. This is The Natural, the scene where, you know, they're about to make the pitch, and then he points out, kind of pulls a little Babe Ruth on him there, and he's just about to knock it out of the park. He's showing you where he's gonna hit the shot. And so I'm gonna go ahead and call this shot real quick. I'm pointing out there. My podcast is ranked number 42 of Nashville's top 100. I don't know if your podcast is ranked yet, but I'm just calling the shot, people. Yancy's podcast will be ranked number 1 here before too much longer. It's the exquisite Stained Glass Kids Erskine Music Podcast will be number 2.
Oh my gosh!
Calling my shot.
I mean, I'll take it. I'm not gonna fight you on that. I will say, everyone, you can go to stainedglasskids.com to go learn more about the podcast. Go straight to it. Obviously, it's on any of the podcasting platforms. Stained Glass Kids with Yancy. Find that. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook as well. And every week I share some quotes on the social media from that week's episode, just some things that stuck out to us. So follow along with that, repost, share, text it to people, all the things, and we'll make this thing grow.
Amen.
So Erskine's prediction can come true.
Call in the shot, folks. What do we got to do here? Oh, that was my back crack, but you know, sound effects are not on.
Hey, that's all right.
Nobody could hear it. Anyway, consummate professional, incredible friend. Thank you so much, Yancy. You were always wonderful.
Thank you for having me, Erskine.
And I think what I'll do is I'll put this podcast in 2 different episodes because I want to keep my weekend podcast at about 30 minutes or so. So we'll chop it up. You'll get subsequent weeks with Yancy, which will be to the delight of everyone. And so thank you so much, Yancy. And we'll be in contact soon, I'm sure.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Oh, folks, don't think that we're done yet. We're not done yet because this is the Erskine Music Show. And because we had talked a little bit about that collaborative effort between Yancy and I want to play you guys a little snippet of that. Here's a song made in the image of God. And look, I guess this is my claim to fame. I had one of those moments last night where I was like, why, yes, that was me. When one of the artists that was there last night at the studio said, wait a minute, are you the one that was singing in the song Made in the Image of God? I was like, yeah, I was a cartoon character. That was me. That was me. And I had that kind of proud moment there where I could be identified with somebody who had done such great things. So here's Cartoon Erskine, Cartoon Yancy, and Made in the Image of God.